Perfetto, buonasera a tutti. Vi do il benvenuto a questo webinar questa sera e una semplicemente informazione di servizio, e poi io parlerò sempre in inglese. Questa è un webinar che è tenuto con traduzione simultanea, per cui prego attivate l'interpretariato, che lo potete attivare se siete da computer, sotto dove c'è il globo, c'è scritto interpretariato. Se siete invece da cellulare, i tre pallini sopra, e scegliete la lingua in cui voi desiderate che venga tradotto il webinar. Um, I am very, really excited and thrilled to welcome tonight's guest, Professor Paul Reynolds. I'm surely a leading authority in the field of glycation and metabolic health. Hi, Paul, welcome.
Hello, thank you. Wonderful to be here with you tonight.
Thank you. And Dr. Paul Reynolds is currently professor of cellular physiology at the Department of Physiology and Developmental Biology at Brigham Young University in Utah, USA. And he has dedicated his career to investigating how advanced glycation and glycation, also end products at its ages, and the RAGE receptor system drive inflammation, aging, and chronic disease. And this is really a very, very important topic. He has published many peer-reviewed studies, included important work on RAGE signaling in lung inflammation, because lung was your main topic for many years.
That's right. Yes.
That's interesting. And the impacts of this particulate matter and tobacco, of diesel particulate and tobacco, smoke. And that we have a question, of course, about it and smoke, and also if cigarettes or e-cigarettes. Beyond lab research, he hosts a weekly podcast, The College of Glycation, where he breaks down complex metabolic topics into practical strategies for improving health. His unique strength lies in translating biochemical insight into actionable lifestyle advice, drawing on nutrition, circadian rhythms, and metabolic interventions to limit age formation and promote healthy aging. I'm really very, very happy to have you, Paul, because you have such a ways to bring stuff as it were very, very easy and very understandable for all of us. And I let you to your presentation. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, thank you. And again, wonderful to be here with you all tonight. I met Christina a few years ago, and every interaction has been wonderful. So thanks to you and your team. This is going to be fun. Let me share my screen today and share with your audience. Let's see here. Here we are. These ideas about inflammation and glycation. And as Christina mentioned, when I started, I was really focused on this idea of inflammation. And it's currently very large on the world scene. You know, it's a worldwide problem. And this is an ongoing issue that doesn't really seem to be decreasing over time. Some of the literature, and for those of you interested, you'll see up here, this is the PMID. So any of these articles that I reference, you're welcome to peek at on your own and see the real science. But what's interesting is that over 40% of all adults worldwide have already been diagnosed with an inflammatory marker of some kind. One of the most common ones that are screened is CRP, or C-reactive protein. So while 40% of the population of adults already have high inflammation, about 60% of adults do have chronic inflammatory diets. So they just don't quite know or appreciate the role that inflammation has in their lives at that point. Now, we know from lots of different research articles that inflammation has a role to play in all of these problem diseases, cardiovascular diseases, metabolic diseases, neurological diseases, cancer. All of these diseases are made worse by inflammation, and inflammation has a key role in each. But I've been more focused lately on this idea of longevity, how long we live and the quality of our lives, because we also know from this article and many others that inflammation is very clearly related to the longevity of our lives. The more we can decrease inflammation, the higher quality and lengthiness of our lives will become. So for your audience, they might be wondering, what is inflammation? Well, there are a lot of different ways to talk about inflammation. And I'd like for your audience to know that inflammation is basically our body's way of protecting ourselves. So if we see any kind of problem in the environment, we'll respond to that by way of inflammation. And the main controllers of inflammation are little molecules called cytokines. These have a tendency to go up when we're undergoing acute inflammation. Think of a wound or a scratch or something like that where you'll get redness and heat and swelling. But you can see here that those cytokines should go back down once the problem is corrected. But what we're talking about tonight is this abnormal condition known as chronic inflammation. That's where there's a failure to eliminate the trigger. And this lasts for a long time, months or years or a lifetime. And this is the inflammation that you want to control. So you might be wondering what causes this type of inflammation. Well, there are many causes. Infections could include a large group of injuries, lots of different types of inflammation causing conditions. But what we'll talk about tonight is this idea of insulin resistance. Now, many will know already about insulin. Christina does a wonderful job of talking about insulin resistance all the time. And what insulin does is it is a molecule, a hormone technically, that is released when blood sugar goes high. And its job is to take that blood sugar and stack it into cells, store it, and therefore bring blood sugar back down. But when you have too high of insulin, your cells start to ignore that stimulus. They don't hear the message very well, and therefore you become insulin resistant over time. And that is inflammation causing. So where does this high insulin come from? Well, again, as I mentioned, this high glucose. So anytime glucose levels are high, insulin will be released in response to bring the levels back down. So if glucose is the problem, we really need to understand what glucose is doing in our bodies. So here's a little experiment. If we pull glucose to the side, I like to think of three main things that glucose does in our body. Okay, let's do them in order. Here's number one. So when glucose is available, what it does is it goes into the cell through a little doorway you can see here, and within the cell, you'll break down that sugar into energy. But when glucose is way too high, if there's a glucose spike, all that extra glucose rushes to the mitochondria. And remember, mitochondria's job is to turn that glucose into energy. They're very good at it. They are professional. They do a great job, and they are very good. So the problem is when glucose goes way too high, it's very overwhelming for the mitochondria, and they don't get happy. And in fact, they slowly start to shut down. And when they shut down, they'll release little molecules called free radicals. Many have heard of those before. These have very large consequences in the body. They cause cancer, they break holes in membranes. Anything they touch, they will cause damage. Now, your body is very smart, and it knows that these free radicals are problems. So your body will respond by causing, you guessed it, inflammation. So if you're spiking glucose all the time, your body will respond by causing inflammation, and that inflammation will go up as well. So that's number one, you'll burn it for energy. Number two is that if you have extra glucose in the body, inside and outside of the cell, it will go through a process called glycation. Any extra glucose will run around and bump into proteins and fats and even DNA and stick onto them. Sugar is very sticky. This is not an enzyme requiring effect. It rather will bump into a molecule and change its function forever. And that's another problem. So we get the inflammation and the glycation. So here's number three. Your body will want to protect itself against extra inflammation and glycation. So there's a very elegant solution. Anytime your glucose spikes, your body, as I've mentioned, will release insulin. And insulin's job is to take all that sugar and package it into cells. It puts it mostly into the liver and into muscle cells. And why that does that is because, remember, too much glucose causes inflammation and glycation. So we got to store it. We have to hide it away. But when your liver and muscle cells become full, you next start to put glucose into fat cells. And that is why we gain weight. In fact, when we get obese, when we gain weight, that is actually a coping mechanism. It's a protective mechanism. Our body protects us from too much inflammation and too much glycation by storing all that glucose in fat cells, making us larger. I don't think people think of it that way. We don't want to appreciate our fat growth by way of an anti-inflammatory angle, but that's essentially what's happening. So we want to guard against that, and we want to store up glucose in a healthy way. So those are the three main things that we're doing, because again, glucose is very sticky. It sticks onto proteins, damages them, and that's glycation. So let's take a look at what glycation is doing in our bodies when we do some kind of normal behaviors. Many say are normal. So here is a scale, and I'm sure everybody knows that we can actually measure our blood glucose. Here is a starting point right here for three main types of people: non-diabetics, pre-diabetics, and a type 2 diabetic. In this case, green, yellow, and red. And at a starting baseline, they're all fairly low like this, but anytime blood glucose goes above 100 milligrams per deciliter, the glucose will begin to stick onto proteins and go through glycation. So let me share with each of you an experiment, and you can try this at home if you have a CGM, continuous glucose monitor, or other ways to track blood sugar. So I want to show you what happens to these three people when they eat some oatmeal and when they eat pizza, a large slice of pizza. And I love pizza, for the record. Okay, so you'll remember oatmeal, we've always been told, is very healthy, but I want to show you what happens in a non-diabetic. After eating oatmeal, a non-diabetic blood sugar goes up to about 150. And after pizza, that level reaches almost 170. Keep in mind, this is a non-diabetic, and when they go above 100, you're getting glycation significantly. Now, the pre-diabetic is much worse. You can see here up to 200 or 220 milligrams per deciliter. And the diabetic is much worse still. They go almost off the chart, over 300, almost 350 following large slices of pizza. So this is kind of where the blood sugar levels go. And that's why you really want to pay attention to blood glucose levels. Let's try to keep it below 100 as often as we can. Now, I've often told people wherever I travel that this is what I like to call the blood glucose balance rule. So let's test your glucose. Let's say you're about 90, and maybe 30 minutes or 60 minutes after you eat, you're still about 90, 95, 100. You're really close. That's almost a no change. So that's wonderful. But let's say you're at 90 and you eat you know, a large bagel or a big donut, you will spike up to about 180 when you eat those things. And even if you're non-diabetic, you are glycating proteins the same amount. Let's go back here, the same amount that diabetics are for just a short period of time. It's those big swings that we want to avoid. So that's the blood glucose balance rule. Now, if it's okay, I'd like to share with your audience some examples of different types of tissues that are, you know, made worse with glycation. And that's what we could do here, because again, if you go over 100, that balance rule is broken and you'll get glycation. So that's supposed to be an eye up there for everyone. The eye is particularly susceptible or prone to glycation. And one place in particular are the crystalline proteins in the lens of your eye. They are really, you know, capable of getting sugar stuck onto them quite easy. And this article shows that over time, glycation causes opacities, that's little dark spots in the vision, that will culminate in cataracts. Even beyond that, in the eye are the retinal cells. These are epithelial cells, and they also are susceptible to glycation. And when they do this over time, it contributes to blindness. So we've all heard that, you know, diabetic patients have ocular or eye problems. A large part of that is glycation. Another tissue would be bones and skin. Now, one protein that is almost everywhere in the body is collagen. It's found in the skin, the dermal layer of skin. It's in cartilage. It's in your brain. It's in your heart. It's almost everywhere in the body, and it's very prone to glycation. So here is a paper that shows that the skin, when it is glycated, leads to fragmentation. It makes skin thinner, it sags, and doesn't stretch very well, essentially causing wrinkles and aging. In the bones, we have much more likelihood for osteoarthritis. That's bone-on-bone arthritis, because the collagens become much more brittle and break easily. Another tissue are the immunoglobulins. Your audience would recognize these are antibodies. They help with immunity. And when they also have sugar attached to them by glycation, your immune response goes down. So you get more likely infections, and it takes you longer to recover when you have the flu or you have illness, those types of things. Now, we've already talked about the insulin idea in the beta cells, but did you know that insulin is also glycated? So when the cells are secreting insulin like crazy because glucose is too high, over time we'll become insulin resistant. But even beyond that, insulin just doesn't work very well, even if it's at a high level, because of the sticky sugar that attaches. I bet your audience would love to hear about LDL. Cholesterols and LDL, those are very important topics that are mentioned all the time. And LDL particles are very glycation prone. When a doctor measures your LDL cholesterol, what she's trying to do is to guess how many LDL particles you have. But that measure is not very accurate. It's an indirect marker, essentially. But these LDL particles are very capable of glycation. So let's say you eat something, you know, with a lot of sugar in it, or amylopectin A, that's the molecule in wheats and grains. The liver will convert those molecules into VLDLs, and this will cause small LDL particles. And it is the small particles that are 8-fold more likely to be glycated. In fact, that's why heart disease is caused. If you consume grains and sugars, these small LDL particles become glycated, and they are the ones that lead to heart disease. So glycation has a role there as well. But let me end with this one. I promise this is our last tissue and we'll move on. But many of you have heard about red blood cells. Red blood cells are probably the most numerous type of cell in the body. They have a really fancy protein called hemoglobin, and this hemoglobin is in charge of moving oxygen from place to place in the body. But hemoglobin, just like the eyes and the immunoglobulins, LDLs, all of those things, hemoglobin is also prone to glycation. And when it's glycated, it does not do its job very well. You work a little harder to get oxygen throughout the body. And this is now a very common test called your HbA1c, or hemoglobin A1c. The A1c relates to the piece of hemoglobin that is very susceptible to sticky sugar. So basically your A1c, which many of you have had measured, is evaluating what percentage of your red blood cells hemoglobin has been glycated. But will you promise, everyone listening today, please promise that you'll always look at elevated A1c as a marker of glycation everywhere. There is no test to evaluate glycation in the eyes or in the bones, less so in the skin or elsewhere. This is the best test that clinicians use. So anytime you have high A1c, imagine glycation is happening everywhere in the body. So here's a scale of HbA1c. Many are aware of this one. You can have anywhere from low 4% and higher percentage of hemoglobin that is glycated. Prediabetes is here and diabetes is after 6.5. So what this means, let's imagine you are sitting here at about 5.7%. The doctor will tell you that you have prediabetes. Now, what do you think the doctor will say next? Well, I hope the doctor is not content there by saying, let's keep an eye on it, or let's track it over time, or let's think about ways we can improve. That is true. We should track it over time and decrease it. What he probably doesn't say is if you're right here at 5.7, you are 300 times more likely to die of a heart attack than if you were at 5.0 right here. So the higher you go, the data shows the more likely you are to have glycation problems. All right, I didn't want this to be scary for anyone. We know that glucose is the problem. Are you guys ready to talk about some solutions? Let's fix the problem.
Yes.
Okay, let's do it. If glucose is the problem, let's mention first off, we are eating carbohydrates way too frequently. Constant carbohydrate consumption is a problem, and we are eating too often. So we're feasting frequently. Why is that an issue? Well, when you think of the carbohydrate issue, about 70% of our current diet is carbohydrates. So it's very important that we focus on those as opposed to fat and protein. In addition to that, carbohydrates are the molecule that causes more insulin to be released. A large effect of insulin, leading to insulin resistance over time and greater inflammation. This idea of insulin can be traced throughout the day as well. If you notice here, a lot of us are having carbohydrate-based breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We have snacks in between that are made of carbohydrates. And don't forget the last snack after dinner before we go to bed. That's a long period. We're keeping insulin much higher. So the solution here is instead of carbohydrate consumption constantly, this right here, we want to control carbohydrates, and instead of feasting all the time, fast periodically. Remember, the best way to prevent this is to avoid foods that will spike your glucose, wheats, grains, processed sugars, those types of things. All right, so here is the solution. Let's control carbs and fast periodically. But the problem is cravings. I can see how many people are in the meeting right now. Lots of folks. Raise of hands, who has experienced craving before? Everyone, right? That's a problem. Cravings are hard to overcome. And we don't really crave fats or proteins, but study after study show that we are always craving the crunchy snacks, carbohydrate, sugar-based meals. So this is where we really need to focus. Now, one way that we can control carbohydrates and fast frequently, and thereby control our cravings is to use a molecule called GLP-1, a very important hormone, GLP-1. It's talked about a lot in um, media and in the doctor's offices. This is a wonderful tool. So let's make sure we all are aware of GLP-1 first, and then talk about ways we can use it to our advantage. So GLP-1 is one of dozens of hormones released by our gut. There are many hormones released there. And the goal for GLP-1 is to make us feel full. So it basically will delay the emptying of our stomach, keeps food in the stomach longer, and it tells our brain to tell us that we're full. That means we have satiety. We are full. We have this brain reaction that says we have enough to eat. At the end, pardon me, GLP-1 makes us feel full. But here's a very interesting study. I don't think it has been given the attention that it deserves. And in fact, this study was published almost 30 years ago. And I don't think, again, many people know about this. GLP-1 is a molecule that makes us feel full, but I want to show you what these researchers did when they took lean people and obese people and fed them a fat and protein-based meal. We won't look at all the details, but can you see it's about the same? Whether you are obese or lean, after you eat fat and protein, the levels of GLP-1 in the body are almost the same, meaning not much of a response to fat or protein. But if you take these same patients and feed them a carbohydrate-based meal, look how different this is. Much more GLP-1 secreted by the lean people, much less GLP-1 here secreted by the obese. What that tells me is if you're leaner to begin with and you eat a bunch of sugar snacks, you start to feel full faster. And although it's a challenge, you will stop eating that soon enough. But notice here that the GLP-1 in your own body, if you're obese, does not really respond very much. So these people will snack and snack and snack, throwing gas on the fire and making it worse. So we really need to understand more about this study on how carbohydrates control GLP-1. All right, so let's look at GLP-1 approaches, and there are two main things to consider. We can make GLP-1 work better via a drug-based approach or a diet-based approach. So let's go in order. Let's talk about the drugs. Now, these have been very popularized in the world today. These are generally semaglutide. So these are the American versions, and there are many examples in Europe as well. But Ozempic and Wegovy are probably the most common types of GLP-1 agonists. These are drugs that have been generated that will make much more pronounced the effects of GLP-1. You'll remember that GLP-1 slows down gut migration, or the rate in which food travels through the gut. But several studies have shown that this type of an outcome slows it down so much that you might even have paralysis. Your stomach stops working entirely, and that can be fatal. The other thing is that you start to degrade muscle mass. In the New England Journal of Medicine, researchers found that GLP-1 drugs cause about 40% 40% of the weight loss comes directly from lean mass. That's your muscle, bone, and water weight. So I don't really focus on totally destroying this narrative of semaglutide. It's just the high doses that are used today are definite problems because they can lead to paralysis of your stomach and major lean muscle mass loss. But maybe small doses, micro doses, can be helpful for a few people that are well underway in diabetic progression. Now, what about cravings? Here's an interesting study I'll share with you that showed how researchers evaluated these cravings over time in individuals that had semaglutide for 2 years. And you can see here, these data are a bit weird, but on the left here, this is craving mitigation or decreased craving. Can you see that over there? No cravings is right here. So they did have an effect of craving suppression early on after just 20 weeks. After a year, still some craving protection, but the same people 2 years later had no effect on their craving. None at all. So what do you think they do? Well, when they have all of their cravings come back really abundantly at 2 years, what they tend to do is they just increase the dose to go back to where they once were. And that's a problem. Remember, death by paralysis or muscle mass. So all of this to say that type 2 diabetics that start this regimen, almost 70% totally stop it after 24 months. They enjoy some benefits on the front end, but they're tired of being sick. They don't like the lean mass loss, and their cravings are no different than when they started. Now, let me end this discussion on drugs with talking about what happens when these people stop taking the drug. Many studies, here's just one, show that yes, you can have a decrease in weight after 1 year, but if you stop taking the drug right here, there is major weight gain that comes back. Now, you're still less heavy than when you started, but they gain back fat tissue. Because if you're like me, I'm a middle-aged man now, it's really hard to gain muscle and bone mass back after you've lost so much. So you're going to gain weight back, and almost all of this is adipose. So mostly these people are more obese, even though they're a little lighter than when they started. So that's a big problem. So let me end with just a quick description about, can you get the same benefits without these drug-based risks? And I think you can. Let's ignore the drugs, no good, but let's focus on the diet. And the goal here is indeed dietary protein, natural fats, and soluble fiber are really well-known inducers of your own GLP-1. Just a year ago, there was a paper that focused on this. That's how cutting edge Christina's podcast is. Just a year ago, we found that when you compare two diets, let's imagine people that are fed a low-fat meal, therefore high carbohydrate, and compare them to people that ate a low carbohydrate meal. I won't go through all of the data, but I will say that your own GLP-1 was about 2.5 times higher if you cut out the carbohydrates. So you're using your own GLP-1 to your advantage. You don't need as many drugs to induce it artificially. Let's cut out the carbs, focus on soluble fiber, proteins, and fats. So let me end with this quick kind of summary, where we go from here. You'll remember that there is a clear link between the abundance of glucose and inflammation. And if we were to control our carbohydrates, and if we fast by avoiding a meal periodically, not a crazy long fast, but if you avoid a meal periodically, your diet becomes healthier, your blood sugar is better controlled, and therefore glycation is minimized, inflammation decreases. And you'll remember at the very beginning, inflammation has a large role to play in your longevity. So I'll end with maybe this idea here that focuses on all of these causes of death. Heart disease is most common, followed by cancer. But if we have more voices in the world, like Christina, that talks about how conventionally we don't want to develop drugs for each of these diseases. Instead, all of these diseases are related. We can innovate our care by controlling the fire that's burning underneath each of them. If we can decrease inflammation by starving out glycation. Remember the glucose change rule? We want to keep it down below 100. If we do that, then we can make progress and slowly decrease the inflammation that causes all of these diseases. So I think I'll end right there. I'm very happy to take any questions that you guys have about any of this material. Thank you very much for paying attention. If you did, that was wonderful. I love to talk about this.
Thank you, Paul, really very much. And you answered it with your slide presentation, some questions yet. And
Okay.
you told that glycation happens when blood sugar is above 100 milligram per deciliter. It can happen.
That's right. It's more likely it happens
Yeah,
above
yeah,
100 than below. Yes.
yeah. But okay. And we can interrupt the glycation process if we, for example, we with a fasting diet or with a low carb diet or ketogenic diet, if you have a very advanced insulin resistance.
Yes.
Would you did you study how many carbs, for example, for someone who is not ill, I mean, without insulin resistance,
Mhm.
a normal person who is also doing sport 4 to 5 times a week,
Mm.
and is with the right circadian rhythms, light exposition, okay.
Mhm.
And how many carbs can do you think, if there are studies, can such a person afford without problems? Because we know that 70% of that what most people are eating are carbs. In Italy, it's the same.
Mm.
It's the same.
Okay.
And but are there data of how much even carbs can we eat without problem?
Yes. Yes. Yes, there are. So let me just first off mention when you look at A1C levels, I wanted to make clear the idea that you'll never get that down to zero, right? You're always going to have about 4.5,
Yeah, yeah,
and higher. And the reason for that is even if you eat no glucose, no sugar at all, the liver will make sure you have enough glucose to do your work. So you're never going to get down to zero. You just want to avoid the big swings, number one. Number two, as far as carbohydrate consumption, if you want a really strong ketogenic state, there are several articles that describe 50 grams of carbohydrates per day are enough to do that. In full disclosure, I want everybody to know I'm not a physician, I'm not a doctor. So if you're wanting to experiment with carbohydrate restriction, just make sure you talk to your physician if that's appropriate. But 50 grams is a strong ketogenic state. And what that means is your body will start to break down your fat stores, releasing ketones in the process and not breaking down glucose as much because there's so few.
yeah, yeah.
There are other articles that show up to about 100 grams of glucose is enough to still have a slightly ketogenic state. So my recommendation is anywhere between 50 and 100 grams. When I'm going strong on, I'll usually start the week with a fast, and then I go straight ketogenic, almost carnivore for a few days. It's like 10 grams per day, but that's just what I like to do personally.
Okay, thank you. And you told that uh, A1C is a good parameter for glycation.
Correct. Yes, it is one that and you should have that part of your normal physical. The doctor would look at that over time. Let's say you go in and you're sitting at a 4.8, 6 months later or a year later, you're at 5.6. What that should tell everyone is, wow, my blood hemoglobin is getting glycated,
Yeah,
but also my crystalline, my collagen, my skin, my brain, my
yes.
heart, everywhere is getting glycated.
How can someone with type 1 diabetes limit glycation?
Yeah, that's a challenge, but it is possible. And all of this comes down to extra glucose consumption. A type 1 diabetic already has control of that with their program. Um, but the goal for a type 1 diabetic would be the excursions. And what I mean by that is if you're sitting at about 100, bouncing around there is appropriate, but going up to 300,
Yeah,
that is the
yeah.
type of thing you'd like to avoid.
That is what Richard Bernstein, and
Hmm.
you know him, he died a couple of months early, I think 1 month ago, and he was 91, type 1 diabetes, and his A1C was about 4.5. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't have such an
that's
A1C,
great.
but his curves, he didn't have curves in with the
Hmm.
CGM, but he
Hmm.
had a line. And
Yeah, that's wonderful.
yeah, it was a really very, very low carb diet, not a low carb high fat, era low carb high protein. And
Hmm.
yeah, because when he began, he had neuropathy, and it took him about 12 years to resolve it with his diet. And
Hmm.
he's now the question for you: can oxidative damage be reversed?
I think it can be reversed because of the rejuvenating
Yeah,
aspects of the body. So you won't reverse on a particular protein that's been damaged by oxidative stress or by free radicals. But as you make new proteins and there's less oxidative stress, you can kind of shift that ratio toward more healthy outcomes. Uh, One way to look at that is this idea of um, ways to quench oxidative stress. So, you're thinking about eating leafy greens, adding, berries and other vitamin-rich foods that are known to be antioxidative.
okay.
Deciding today to do more of that will make those older damaged proteins, when they go away, become replaced by better ones.
And maybe also some skin damages like dark spots,
Hmm.
maybe they can, I don't think that they can disappear, but they can maybe better also.
I think so, yes. The key in that case is the expansion of the spot, right? You
Yeah,
can slow that down and it can start to wane. There are some miraculous things that happen in the body when you go on a low carb diet. You may have seen this in either your clinic or in the people that have talked to you. They go on either a carnivore for a short period of time or a low carb diet, ketogenic diet, and they comment that their skin looks a bit more resilient or
yeah,
more shiny
yeah,
and a little bit better. So there are ways to correct that. Um, there is not a way to go to zero aging. I have not figured that out yet. So we will
yeah,
continue to age, but we'll do it slower if we're
yeah.
careful.
Is there a link between menopause and glycation?
I think that there is because of the data that we know about how hormones are affected by glycation over time. But admittedly, there's not enough known about the perimenopause conditions of females
Yeah,
as
yeah,
it relates to glycation. I might say, though, that when you have insulin resistance, as those tissues are more susceptible to insulin issues like PCOS and some other fertility problems, definitely made worse by insulin resistance. And that holds hands. That's definitely right there with
yeah,
glycation.
yeah.
I think we just need to know a little more.
Are there supplements that help reduce glycation?
Yeah, there are some. Some people like to take carnosine anytime, any I usually take it just in the food that I eat, right? The meat that
Yeah,
I eat,
we eat a lot of
but
meat.
but carnosine is a supplement that a lot of people have commented to the
Yeah,
advantage there. Um, there's also some guanine type molecules that some take, but there's just not a lot of detail about how, you know, a patient could partake in a lot of carbohydrates and take some supplements and have the burden
yeah,
less. There's
yeah.
just not that connection yet.
And do you know in America berberine?
Yes,
Yeah.
berberine. Yep. Yep.
And
I take that. I'll admit I like that. Berberine and some other similar things like glucose replacement with other sweeteners, monk fruit, that kind of thing, has also some advantages because what they do is they'll help you manage your blood glucose
yeah,
better. Lower the glucose, lower the glycation.
and last year at the Keto Life Congress, uh,
Hmm.
um, there was a session about allulose. And
Hmm.
we don't have allulose in Europe. We have stevia, erythritol, and okay, but
Hmm.
we don't have allulose. And I mean, all of you were or are still very enthusiastic about allulose and its properties. Can you please explain to my Folco, what allulose, what is allulose?
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. Um, so allulose is a 5 carbon sugar and base or 6 carbon sugar. It is a rare sugar and it looks very similar to fructose. So if you were to imagine fructose looks like this, we'll say this. What allulose is it is an epimer. It's basically a mirror image of the exact same molecule. And because of that, it has similar properties. So it tastes sweet. It's about 80% as sweet as fructose. So it's pretty sweet. But the issue here is because of its mirror aspect, it is not digested by the intestine. So when you eat allulose, you manipulate the taste centers, so you taste the sweet, but you don't digest it. You don't metabolize it, so it does not cause the problems that fructose does. And for that reason, a lot of people are excited about it as a potential replacement of, you know, the problematic fructose and glucose. So we've done some research in our lab that looks at glycation that follows glucose versus glycation that follows allulose. And there is less glycation and therefore less of these types of chronic diseases, most likely. So we're very excited.
God knows how long it takes before we have allulose in Europe. But yeah, I have a very, very interesting question, and I didn't know until a couple of weeks ago that when you get blood transfusion, okay, this I mean, the blood transfusion has mannitol, a sugar. And if you have, I mean, an illness that you have to get regularly many blood transfusions in a month, you get also mannitol sugar. Is it dangerous maybe for glycation also? Do you have data about it? Because it was really new for me. I didn't know that we have mannitol sugar in blood transfusions.
Yeah, I didn't know that as well, but basically what mannitol is it's a sugar alcohol, like a polyol, and it's used, you know, some people use it as a low calorie sweetener, a diuretic, those
Yeah,
types of
yeah,
things. But mannitol, the data show that it is not known to participate in glycation because glycation, we didn't go through the mechanism or the atoms involved,
yeah,
but glycation uses a carbonyl group. That's a carbon with double bond O.
yeah,
And typical sugars have that, but mannitol, because it's a sugar alcohol, cannot go through that carbonyl. So I don't think it works in glycation. I think therefore it
yeah.
have a bit of an advantage.
Yeah, it's a good news.
Yeah,
Good luck for those
interesting.
people, really. And oh, you research in the lung.
Hmm.
Also, smoke, and I mean the usual smoke from cigarettes, and also smoking from e-cigarettes. Can it
Hmm.
cause
Glycation.
glycation?
Absolutely. Yes. And in fact, that's kind of this, different path that I took in my career. I was very focused on lung disease
Yeah,
and the consequences of exposure. I found in my postdoc lab maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that rage is expressed highly in the lung. And what rage is, it's the receptor for glycation products. And what's interesting is when you burn a cigarette, the tobacco plant in there, the temperature of that burning is a low temperature and it's very conducive. It causes age formation in the smoke. So if you walk through a cloud of smoke, there are a bunch of ages floating in it, and that gets into the lung and it binds to receptors, causing inflammation and breakdown. So I was very focused, none of this metabolism stuff, just lung, lung, lung for too long in my career. And then I started to connect the dots. That same aspect works in brain disease, diabetes, kidney disease, everywhere else. So um, to get to your question, yes, when you burn a cigarette or when you heat up a solution in e-cigarettes, you will make ages and those will cause glycation problems. Um, Many might remember or maybe think about the idea that glycation has been known about for about a century. In 1912, there was a chemist in France. His name was Maillard, and he studied the Maillard reaction. What he was curious about was, let's take proteins and heat it up and see what happens when heat and sugar are added. He was curious about what makes bread dough brown when it gets toasted.
yeah.
And that's basically glycation right there. So the temperature by burning something is what causes glycation, and the same thing happens in tobacco smoke.
And when a person smokes and has insulin resistance, there are two ways to be glycated.
That's correct. Yep. You have glycation that comes from outside sources, exogenous, the smoke, and inside, endogenous.
Uh, did you some research, Paul, about people taking statins because of, you know,
Hmm.
I think we have an overprescribing of statins. I think it's in America, it's the same. And
Yeah.
taking statins and have a worsening of the glucose parameters and maybe a rising in glycation.
Yeah, that's interesting because we know that glycation is where sugars attach to proteins, and statins are basically a coenzyme A reductase inhibitor. So it lowers LDL cholesterol, reduces cardiovascular risk. That's what the dogma says. Um, But I think when you look at the mechanisms of what statins do, they are known to be a bit anti-inflammatory and antioxidative in nature. And therefore, many might think that they lower glycation. There are other problems with statins over time, but there is kind of a gray area of relationship between glycation causes. Now,
Yes,
the controversial part, though, there's a lot of large studies that show that statins might modestly increase the risk of type 2 diabetes. You probably heard of the Jupiter trial
yeah,
and stuff like
yeah,
that. So, and what they'll do is they'll slightly elevate blood glucose in those studies. And then again, with more blood glucose, you'll
yeah.
get more glycation.
Okay. And maybe that you know if there are so papers about glycation and atrial fibrillation risk?
Just maybe not defibrillizing, but yeah, maybe just glycation with regard to cardiovascular risk. The more likelihood that you have, cardiac decline and cardiac arrest, or
Okay,
even
okay.
atherosclerosis, those are made worse by the accumulation of
Yes.
ages over time.
Uh, I look now at now live
The
questions.
chat. Yes, I see everybody is asking in Italiano, so that's going to be challenging for me.
No, 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 don't worry
I
because
won't worry.
allora,
Yeah.
no, non vuoi, cioè, Alex, l'esame per fare il glucosio, voi dovete fare l'emoglobina glicata. Then Cecilia is asking if she has so eyes problems, or
Mm-hmm.
of course, as you told, you have a higher risk to blindness because of a decompensated diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
If you know you have this risk, but you continue to eat bread, cereals, and sugars, yes, she's asking for her mommy. It's many people have problems with their parents.
Mm-hmm.
They have diabetes type 2, but they
Mm-hmm.
continue to eat, and that's dangerous. My granny, she lost more than 80% of her eyesight, and she
Mm-hmm.
died with 73 from a heart attack, and she
Ah,
was really a decompensated type 2 diabetic.
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
that's
Yeah, that is a problem. I see the comment here now, Cecilia. Buenos Aires. That's as far as I know. But yes, that's a problem, especially with the older population that really love their diet that they've had. But my best recommendation is they can eat. Like I love a good, baguette when I'm in France. I'll eat bread. Have no problem with that. It's just I try not to make it the central part of my diet. Uh, if you could put in some good days of carbohydrate restriction, followed by some of the breads and the pastas that are so tasty, I think that is an advantage. For the eyes, yes, it's the accumulation of ages, but those ages, what they're really doing is they're hurting the microvasculature, the little blood vessels in the eyes, and that's what's causing the problem of starving those eye tissues of nutrients and causing problems there. So that's my best recommendation for Cecilia and others. If they love their cereal and their sugar snacks, just have them more or less common in their diet would be best.
I answer only to Serena because she's thinking that she has problems with the blood transfusion. Serena, non
Mm-hmm.
hai problemi, come ha detto il professor Reynolds, perché il mannitolo è un alcol dello zucchero e non può venire glicato in quanto non ha la molecola di glicazione come ha invece il glucosio. Don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Anna is asking about 50 grammi. Anna, sono 50 grammi non pesati, 50 grammi di quello che è contenuto nel carboidrato. Helena, thank you, Dr. Reynolds. Excellent lesson on this important issue. Will this lesson be available? Yes, of course. You have it available in English and also with translation on my YouTube channel. Um, uh, Cecilia is thanking and she's convinced now, and now she understands that it's important to reduce carbs and it's easier also to make an intermittent fasting. What do you think about fruit?
About fruit?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love fruit. I don't eat a lot of it, but I try to have some of the, like blueberries and certain berries that I know are good and antioxidants. I don't really eat apples or bananas very much. There's a lot of carbohydrates in those. But again, if you eat them sparingly, very infrequent, and mostly have the fats and proteins that are found in nature, I think fruits are really good.
And also fruit after dinner.
Yes. Yep. If you can do that, again, anytime you can address what they call in America the sweet tooth, when you want to have something sweet like a dessert, for sure have that at the end of your
Yeah.
dinner. All the proteins and the fats on the front end and carbohydrates last.
What about metformin to lower inflammation?
Yes, that is a kind of a circular approach, but it does have anti-inflammation effects. Metformin will allow you to have a bit more insulin sensitivity. And because of that, your cells are more, again, sensitive to insulin. Insulin will work better by hiding glucose into cells. And again, if you pull glucose out of the blood, out of fluids, put it into cells, glycation and inflammation goes down. So it's not a direct effect on inflammation, it just goes in the back door.
Yeah. And Julia asks if you please could repeat the concept of excess of glucose for the mitochondria and why, how it come that they release free radicals.
Yes, so glucose, when they get into cells, will make its way to the mitochondria because the mitochondria are, that's their main job. They do really well at manipulating glucose to make energy. But when you have so much going in there, it becomes overwhelming. The mitochondria can only work so fast, and the faster they go, remember, one of the key elements in energy manipulation is oxygen on the back end. Oxygen is necessary for generating ATP. So if you're going really fast through all of the steps, there's more likelihood that they will release free radicals. And they do that because they're on the verge of shutting down. Imagine like an engine going really fast, high RPM, really fast. It starts to slow down and not work as well. And in the process, free radicals are released. Um, the mechanism for that is mostly the oxidative phosphorylation. That's the cellular respiration cycle. But it's a clear byproduct when organelles are starting to shut down. That's the problem.
Okay. At the last one, Serena is saying that after taking metformin, my pain on knees almost disappeared. Interesting, really
Yeah.
interesting. But I think that Professor Reynolds and me are more enthusiastic about the disappearing of your knees pain with a right lifestyle, with a right diet,
Mhm.
it's really like I liked so much you're telling us what we can do to enhance our natural production of GLP-1 and not taking semaglutide and Ozempic or Mounjaro or I mean
Mhm.
there is a big market and what's very saddening that many physicians are pushing it without telling people which diet to do and that they should do resistance training. They don't
Yes.
keep this information.
Yeah, they don't do that. And we just do not know enough about what these drugs do to the person long term over multiple years. So be very careful out there. It's not a
Yeah.
quick fix to do your same bad habits and lose weight.
I spoke with a colleague of mine. He has a very, very great experience with peptides and he
Hmm.
knows them from the beginning. And I spoke with him long last week, and it was interesting because I don't use them. And he told me that the problem is you have a saturation of receptors. You get problems if you give Ozempic once a week. It's
Mhm.
too often. It's better to give it smaller, as you told, smaller dose every
Yes.
10 days and and test and look at the person maybe longer to have
Hmm.
bigger intervals because the receptors aren't responding anymore. And then you are taking peptides and it's like water. It's like
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah, there's no effect on that because what they call it is those receptors are saturable. They're saturated and they don't work anymore as well. So I'm a big advocate of what I like to call microdosing. You know,
Yeah,
the physician wants you to take it up here, but a very small dose over longer periods of
yeah,
intervals is probably going to be very helpful for, those that are very
yeah,
overweight and really advanced in their diabetes. I think there's an advantage for that, but you have to mix that with the lifestyle changes.
yeah. Last question, Paul. Uh, what's very fascinating is the sugar diet with the FGF21 production, and it's really fascinating. Did you do some studies about it, or did you hear about the sugar diet and its concept?
I have heard about it a bit, but I don't know enough about it. Um, we study a lot of FGFs, mostly 8 and 10 in our lab. Um, but the chronic sugar intake that leads to FGF21 resistance might be similar to insulin resistance. So we just need to be really careful about that.
Yeah, yeah. But it's fascinating. Paul,
Yeah.
thank you
All
very
the all
much.
the kids would love to try that. I know my kids would love to try that diet.
Yeah, but I think it's fascinating and it's feasible for a short period of time
Yeah.
because you are I think the protein intake it's too small, and that's
Hmm.
because it works. I have a diet, a similar diet for my folk, but I do